Marcus Webb was 39 years old the autumn Vanessa decided he was finished. He drove a 10-year-old Silverado with a cracked dashboard and a thermos of black coffee wedged between the seats. He wore work boots that had been resoled twice, and a gray canvas jacket with his company's logo faded to near nothing above the left breast pocket. To most people who passed him on the sidewalk outside the Dilworth Coffee on East Boulevard, he looked like a man who supervised other men. Competent, unassuming, the kind of person whose name you forgot the same day you learned it. That was not an accident. What Vanessa said to him that Thursday evening in October arrived without warning and without kindness. They were standing in the kitchen of the house Marcus had designed the renovations for with his own hand. The herringbone tile he had laid himself across the entryway floor, the crown molding he had measured and cut on a Saturday in January 2 years back, the load-bearing wall he had opened up to make the kitchen breathe. Vanessa stood near the island, with her arms crossed, and her jaw set in the particular way that meant she had already rehearsed this conversation several times without him. She said, "You will never be enough for the life I am trying to build." Then she pulled her wedding band from her finger, walked to the kitchen window, and dropped it into the small wicker trash basket beside the recycling bin. The sound it made was almost nothing, a faint tap against the wicker edge, then silence. Marcus looked at the basket. He did not move toward it. What Vanessa did not know, what she had never thought to ask, was that the quiet man she had just dismissed had built something worth more than $340 million in assets under management, and that every dollar of it was still in his name. She believed she was freeing herself from a man who would never arrive. She had no idea where he had already been. Before we jump into the story, comment where in the world you are watching from and subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you need to hear. The morning had started the way most of Marcus's mornings started. He was up before 5, standing on the back porch of their house on Ideal Way in the Dilworth neighborhood of Charlotte, North Carolina, holding his thermos with both hands and watching the sky go from black to the particular blue-gray that arrived 20 minutes before dawn. He liked that hour. Nothing was performing for anyone in that hour. He had bought the house 11 years earlier, when it was a sagging 3-bedroom with outdated plumbing and a foundation crack that ran 18 inches along the eastern wall. The inspector had called it a concern. Marcus had looked at that crack the way he looked at every problem in the field, not with alarm, but with the kind of patient attention that comes from understanding how things are actually held together. He had repaired the crack himself over a weekend in March, using a hydraulic cement mixture his mother had once watched him prepare on their back porch in Gastonia when he was 16 years old, and just learning what concrete could do. His mother, Irene Webb, had not lived to see the house finished. She passed the winter before Marcus completed the kitchen renovation, the one with the tile she would have loved, the pendant lights she had circled in a catalog she kept beside her chair. She used to say, "You can tell everything about a man's character by what he's willing to build from the ground up." He had quoted that line to Vanessa once, early on, when she had asked what drove him. Vanessa had smiled and said it sounded like something needle-pointed on a throw pillow. She meant it fondly then. That was before Derek Ashton. Vanessa had joined the regional marketing division at Crestline Properties 14 months ago, a mid-sized commercial real estate development firm operating across the Carolinas and Tennessee. Derek Ashton was their vice president of business development. He had the kind of presence that announced itself before he entered a room, tailored suits, a silver watch that caught light from across a lobby, and the practiced confidence of a man who had spent years making other people feel slightly underdressed. Vanessa had mentioned him in passing at first, then with more frequency, then with a particular quality of attention in her voice that Marcus recognized and filed away quietly. He was an engineer. He understood load distribution, He understood what happened when pressure accumulated in places that were not designed to hold it. Marcus had not confronted her. That was not how he operated. He observed, documented, waited. The first signal had arrived 6 weeks earlier in the form of an email notification he was not supposed to see. Vanessa's laptop had been left open on the kitchen counter while she showered, and a calendar invitation had previewed on the screen. A dinner reservation at Haberdish, a restaurant in Noda, for 2, under Derek Ashton's name. Vanessa's name appeared in the guest field. The time was a Thursday evening. She had told Marcus she had a client dinner in Concord that Thursday. Marcus had not opened the laptop. He had closed his thermos, picked up his keys, and driven to his first site visit of the day. But he had noted the date. By the time Vanessa stood in their kitchen telling him he would never be enough, Marcus had been building a record for 6 weeks. He had not hired anyone. He had not accessed her accounts. He had simply watched and waited and followed the patterns that presented themselves to a man who knew how to read a structure's stress points without touching its walls. The documentation began the morning after the kitchen confrontation. Marcus was at his desk in the spare bedroom he used as a home office by 6 in the morning. He pulled up 3 months of their joint account statements, the household account Vanessa managed, and into which both of them deposited a monthly contribution for shared expenses. He had not looked at this account carefully in years. There was no reason to. There was reason now. His hands did not shake. He went through the statements the way he reviewed a structural report, methodically, starting from the earliest date, flagging anomalies before drawing conclusions. The first one surfaced in August. A dinner charge at a steakhouse on South Boulevard, $247 for 2. Vanessa had told him that evening she was working late. He kept reading. A weekend hotel stay in September, 2 nights at the Kimpton Tryon Park downtown. Vanessa had told him she was visiting her sister in Greensboro. He cross-referenced his own calendar. He had been in Raleigh that weekend for a project review. He had called her both evenings and she had answered from what sounded like a quiet apartment. Her sister's guest room, she had said. Marcus kept a yellow legal pad beside the statements. He wrote amounts, dates, and descriptions in his neat, precise handwriting, the same handwriting that appeared on hundreds of construction drawings stored in his office across town. By the time he reached the most recent statement, he had documented $47,000 in unexplained charges over 14 months. That number mattered, not because of the money. Marcus Webb had not worried about $47,000 in a very long time, but because of what it represented. A pattern. A timeline. A record that any reasonable person could read and understand. He photographed each statement with his phone. He created a folder. He forwarded copies to a private email address that existed solely for the kinds of records that needed to be kept somewhere safe. Then, he made one call. Claudette Sims answered on the second ring. Claudette had practiced family and corporate law in Charlotte for 31 years. She was 62 years old, possessed a voice like a closing argument, and had known Marcus since the year he incorporated his first holding company. She did not do small cases. She did not do emotional cases. She did cases where documentation was so complete that opposing counsel typically requested mediation before the first hearing. Marcus drove to her office on Tryon Street that afternoon. She wore reading glasses on a beaded chain and did not look up from the statements until she had read every page. When she finished, she removed her glasses and placed them on the desk. "You have been careful," she said. He nodded. Not careful enough to prevent it. Careful enough to document it. She looked at him with the particular steadiness of a woman who had watched many men arrive in that chair carrying grief they had not yet processed. "What do you want, Marcus?" I want a legal separation prepared. I want full financial disclosure. And I want the corporate structure reviewed before anything is filed, because I do not want Vanessa's attorneys reaching for things that are not marital assets. Claudette made a note. Webb Industrial Partners is still structured the same way? Held entirely through Whip Holdings, LLC, her name appears nowhere in the corporate documents. It was established before the marriage and has remained private throughout. And she still does not know. She never asked. Claudette held his gaze for a moment. That would have bothered some women, she said. The not knowing. It bothered her in the wrong direction, Marcus replied. She assumed small because she saw quiet. Real power operates in spaces that don't require an audience. That was the other thing Claudette said sometimes, usually when a client was tempted to make a move before the records were complete. She said it now, quietly, almost to herself. Then she opened a new file. 3 days passed. Marcus went to work. He reviewed drawings, walked 2 active sites, and attended a pre-construction meeting for a mixed-use development in South End that his company had been contracted to engineer. He wore the same work boots. He drove the same truck. He came home each evening to a house that felt like a building whose interior walls had been quietly removed, the structure still standing, but the warmth already gone. Vanessa was there when he arrived on 2 of those 3 evenings. She was cordial in the careful, hollow way of a person who had already emotionally departed a place and was simply waiting for the paperwork to confirm it. She asked about his day. He answered. She made tea. He read. Neither of them mentioned the kitchen, the ring, or what she had said. He kissed her cheek before bed on the 2nd night. She paused, just slightly. Then she accepted it. The dramatic irony of that moment settled into him without drama. He simply noted it, the way an engineer notes a beam that is carrying a load it does not know is there. On the 4th morning, his uncle Roy called. Roy Webb was 67 and lived in the same house in Gastonia where he had raised Marcus after Irene passed. He was a retired electrician who had spent 40 years reading wiring diagrams and had developed, somewhere in that process, an uncanny ability to identify when something in a system was about to fail. "How bad is it?" Roy asked. Without preamble, Marcus was sitting in his truck in the parking lot of a coffee shop on Central Avenue. "How did you know?" "Vanessa called me. Said you two were separating and that you were having a hard time accepting it." Marcus looked out the windshield. "What did you say?" "I said I'd check on you. Then I hung up and called you." There was a pause. "Is Ashton involved?" Roy asked. "Yes." Roy made a sound that was not quite a word. "I met him once, at that fundraiser last spring." He shook hands like a man who'd been told hands were important. Marcus almost smiled. "He asked me to stay out of it for now, Roy. You're already in it." "I know. But I need the records to tell the story. Not me." Roy was quiet for a moment. "Your mama used to say you were the most patient person she'd ever known." She said it like a compliment and a warning at the same time. Marcus held that. "She was right about both," he said. After the call, he opened the project management platform he used to track active construction timelines and cross-referenced it against Vanessa's public work calendar, the one synced to their shared household app. Over the previous 14 months, on 9 separate occasions, Vanessa had listed late client dinners or travel dates that corresponded precisely with gaps in Derek Ashton's public-facing event schedule. He pulled Derek's LinkedIn activity history, which was public. Every gap aligned. He compiled the cross-referenced dates into a single document. He added it to the folder. Then, His phone buzzed with a notification from a professional contact inside Crestline Properties, a project manager named Leon Briggs, whom Marcus had worked alongside on a mixed-use development in Ballantyne 3 years earlier. Leon had heard through channels that Claudette's firm had initiated a financial discovery inquiry touching certain Crestline transactions. Marcus had not asked Leon to reach out. Leon had reached out on his own. The message was brief. Derek's been running personal expenses through project development accounts. Marketing approvals signed off by someone named Vanessa Webb. Thought you should know. Marcus read the message twice. Then, he forwarded it to Claudette. The rehook arrived quietly, as they always did, not with the drama of a confrontation, but with the flat, factual weight of a document that changed the nature of the problem entirely. Claudette called him before 7 the following morning. She had reviewed the Crestline records that Leon's tip had surfaced. Derek Ashton had routed approximately $61,000 in personal and semi-personal expenses, luxury hotel stays, car service charges, a weekend at a resort in Kiowa Island through Crestline's marketing development budget over the past 11 months. Each charge required a secondary departmental approval. Vanessa's digital signature appeared on 23 of them. Did she know what she was approving? Marcus asked. Claudette's voice was measured. The charges were categorized as client entertainment and regional partnership development. Whether she reviewed each one carefully or simply approved what Derek placed in front of her is a question I cannot answer from the records alone. What the records do establish is a documented pattern of approval. Marcus looked at the legal pad on his desk. Was she benefiting personally? There is a 5-day stay at the Wentworth Mansion in Charleston in March, Claudette said. Billed to the marketing account as a partnership retreat. Leon confirmed it was not a company event. Your bank statements show Vanessa's card was active in Charlotte that weekend, so Derek paid for it and covered it with company money. That is what the records suggest. Marcus closed his eyes briefly. Then he asked the question that had been sitting at the bottom of everything for 6 weeks. Did Derek offer her something specific? A title? A role? Claudette hesitated. There is one more document. I received it this morning from Leon, forwarded from a colleague inside Crestline's HR division. It is an internal draft, a proposed vice president of regional marketing position, effective date pending board review. Vanessa Webb's name appears in the candidate field. Marcus let that settle. The promotion was never posted publicly, Claudette continued. It was not routed through standard HR process. It originated from Derek Ashton's executive account. He understood the architecture immediately, the way he always understood a building before he walked its floors. Derek had not chosen Vanessa because he believed in her capabilities. He had chosen her because her signature was worth something to him, and because a woman who believed she was being elevated was unlikely to ask why. Some structures look load-bearing until you test them. That was something Marcus had learned in his first year of engineering from a supervisor who had spent 30 years watching confident men underestimate what they could not see. He told Claudette to prepare the full financial disclosure filing. He also told her to contact Crestline's independent board counsel. The reckoning came on a Tuesday morning in November. The location was a conference room on the 14th floor of Crestline Properties headquarters, building on South Tryon Street. A glass-walled room with a long maple table, 12 chairs, and a view of the Charlotte skyline that Vanessa had described to Marcus once as the kind of view that reminded you what success looked like. Marcus arrived early. He wore a dark jacket, a white shirt, and the same plain watch Vanessa had twice suggested he replace. Vanessa arrived 7 minutes later. She was dressed in a charcoal blazer, and carried herself with the particular composure of someone who believes they are about to receive something. When she saw Marcus seated at the table beside Claudette, the composure shifted. Not dramatically, just slightly, like a column that has absorbed an unexpected load. "What is this?" she said. Her attorney, a man named Forsyth who specialized in high-net-worth divorces, placed a hand on her arm and guided her to the opposite side of the table. Derek Ashton arrived 3 minutes after that. He wore his navy suit and the silver watch. He took in the room with a single practiced scan. Claudette, the compliance attorney from Crestline's board, a senior HR representative, and Marcus. His scan paused on Marcus for just a moment. He recovered quickly. He was very good at recovering quickly. "Elaine," Claudette said quietly to the board compliance attorney, whose name was actually Patricia Wren, but whose manner reminded Marcus of someone who had long since stopped needing anyone's approval. "Patricia, shall we begin?" Patricia opened the first folder. She began with the expense records. 23 approvals over 11 months. The dollar amounts appeared on a printed summary sheet that she placed in front of each person at the table. Vanessa looked at the sheet. Her expression remained neutral, the way an engineer's face looks when reading a report that has not yet reached its finding. "These were categorized as standard marketing expenditures," Derek said. His voice was even. "Departmental approval is a routine process." Patricia turned to the second document. "The Kiowa Island stay was not a company event," she said. She placed a printed confirmation beside the expense record. Vanessa's own credit card activity places her in Charlotte during those 5 days. The room and incidental charges were billed to Crestline and approved through the marketing account. Vanessa looked at the credit card record. Then, she looked at Derek. He did not look back at her. Patricia moved to the proposed vice presidency document. She placed it on the table. The position was never posted through HR, she said. It originated from one executive account. The candidate was selected before the role was defined. Vanessa's chin lifted slightly. "I earned that position." Patricia waited a moment. Then she said the position was not approved by the board. It was not reviewed by HR. It was created and assigned by the person who had been routing personal expenses through your approval queue for 11 months. The room was very quiet. Derek cleared his throat. Vanessa was the most qualified candidate for a leadership role in regional marketing. This is a character attack, dressed as a compliance matter. Claudette opened the second folder. She removed 2 documents and placed them on the table with the quiet economy of a person who has done this many times before. The first was the forensic summary of the expense approvals, each charge, each approval signature, each corresponding personal benefit. The second was Derek's draft termination proposal. Prepared 2 weeks earlier, it named Vanessa as the executive responsible for authorizing irregularly classified expenses and recommended her separation for cause. Vanessa stared at the document. Derek's voice dropped. That was a contingency document. Standard legal protection. Against who? Vanessa said. He did not answer. She read the language slowly. The document described her as the approving authority, the primary signatory, the employee who had failed to exercise appropriate oversight. Derek's name did not appear in the liability section. His name appeared in the prepared statement as a concerned senior executive who had flagged the irregularities internally. "That is a lie," Vanessa said. Her voice was steady, but something beneath it had cracked. "You told me these were legitimate charges. You told me the position was already approved." Derek looked toward his attorney. His attorney placed a hand on the table in the way attorneys place hands on tables when they are preparing to say something careful. He never got the chance. Vanessa reached into her bag and removed a folder of her own. She had kept the messages. Every private message Derek had sent her through the platform they had used, promises about the vice presidency, instructions to approve charges before the end of month cycle, reassurances that her loyalty would be recognized. She placed them on the table one page at a time. You told me the board had already approved the position. You told me the expenses were pre-authorized. Derek's composure began to fail at its edges. You kept those? I protected myself. You participated in every approval because you told me it was standard process. Vanessa's voice had risen slightly. She pressed it back down. You told me I was being elevated. You told me I was the future of this division. And you believed it, Derek said, and his voice held something that might have been contempt, or might have been the desperation of a man watching his architecture collapse. Patricia Wren struck the table once, with one knuckle, lightly. That is enough. The silence that followed was the kind Marcus had learned to recognize on job sites, the moment after a beam settles and before anyone has confirmed the load is safe. Patricia turned to Marcus. Mr. Webb, she said. Please. Marcus opened the folder in front of him. He had not spoken yet. He had let the room do what rooms do when the documents are arranged correctly. Now he placed 4 items on the table. The first was the original Articles of Incorporation for Webb Industrial Partners, LLC, dated 14 years earlier, 2 years before his marriage to Vanessa. His name appeared as sole founder and managing member. The second was the operating agreement for WIP Holdings, the parent entity through which all assets were held. Vanessa's name did not appear. The third was a current asset summary prepared by his accounting firm. Total assets under management, $347 million across 9 commercial construction and engineering projects in the Carolinas, Virginia, and Tennessee. The fourth was a 1-page letter from Webb Industrial Partners Board of Advisors confirming that all corporate assets were held as separate property predating the marriage and had at no point been commingled with marital funds. Vanessa looked at the documents. She looked at them the way a person looks at something when they are trying to find the error, the typo, the misprint, the explanation that restores the picture they already held. There was no error. You built this, she said. Her voice had lost its professional surface entirely. It was just a voice now. When? Before we were married, Marcus said. And during. I have been operating in this space for 14 years. You never told me. You never asked what I had built. You looked at the truck and the boots and the job sites, and you made a decision about what they meant. Vanessa shook her head. We were married, Marcus. This should have been disclosed. Claudette answered before Marcus could. The separate property doctrine in North Carolina is clear. Assets established and maintained prior to and separately from the marital estate are not subject to equitable distribution. Mr. Webb's corporate holdings were never commingled with marital assets and are fully documented as separate property. We are disclosing them now as a matter of legal completeness, not obligation. Derek Ashton stared at the asset summary. $347 million, he said, almost to himself. His voice sounded like someone doing arithmetic that kept returning the wrong answer. Marcus looked at him steadily. That is not what this is about. Derek said nothing. Marcus leaned forward slightly. You found a woman with signing authority and a professional ambition that outpaced her judgment about who was doing the asking. You used her signature to insulate yourself from your own decisions. And when the review came, you had already prepared the document that would leave her standing on the wrong side of it. He paused. You will now let the board and the attorneys determine what that means for your career and your legal exposure. That is their work, not mine. My work here is finished. Patricia Wren addressed the board's findings. Derek Ashton's employment was terminated for cause, effective immediately. The expense irregularities were referred to outside legal counsel and the appropriate regulatory bodies. Vanessa's position, the vice presidency that had never officially existed, was formally declined to be established. She was placed on administrative leave pending review of her role in the approval process. Vanessa sat very still through the reading of the resolutions. When it was over, she closed the folder in front of her and placed both hands flat on the table. She looked at Marcus. You let me believe you were struggling, she said. Marcus looked back at her without anger. He had moved past anger some time ago, not into forgiveness, but into the cleaner space on the other side of it. I worked the way I worked because it suited me. I drove what I drove because it served me well. I walked those job sites because a man who built things needed to remain connected to the ground they stood on. He let that settle. You decided that visible success was the only kind worth having. I decided differently. Those are two separate choices, and they told you everything you needed to know about who I was. You chose to read them as failure. Vanessa's eyes filled. Marcus held her gaze. I am not angry, he said quietly, but I am clear. Those are not the same thing. He gathered his documents. He stood. He nodded to Patricia, to Claudette, to the HR representative who had sat silent through the entire proceeding. Then he walked toward the door. Vanessa's voice caught him before he reached it. Marcus, he stopped. He did not turn immediately. When he did, she was holding something in her palm, a small object that caught the overhead light. Their wedding ring. She had retrieved it from the wicker basket then. She held it out not as an offering exactly, but as something she did not know what else to do with. He looked at it for a long moment. You knew who I was for 11 years, he said. That should have been the only thing that mattered. She pressed her lips together. Her attorney placed a quiet hand on her arm. Marcus turned and walked through the glass doors and into the elevator corridor. He did not look back. Behind him was a room that contained a woman who had dropped his ring into a trash basket because she believed he would never be enough, and a man who had spent 14 months using her signature as a shield. Neither of them had known who they were standing next to. Now, they both did. 14 months later, the house on Ideal Way had a new back porch. Marcus had built it himself over 2 weekends in the early spring. Tongue and groove cedar planking, a cedar post railing, and a small bench at the far end, with enough room for 2 people to sit and watch the sky go gray before dawn. He had not rushed it. He had done it the way he did everything, carefully, from the ground up, without announcing the result before it was finished. Webb Industrial Partners had completed its largest project to date, a $78 million mixed-use development in the South End neighborhood of Charlotte, 3 blocks from a job site Marcus had walked as a 24-year-old structural intern. The project employed 41 people full-time and had been recognized by the city's Urban Development Commission for its contribution to the neighborhood's affordable housing component. He read about it in the morning paper over coffee on the new porch. Derek Ashton had resigned from Crestline Properties before the board's formal findings were published. He was the subject of an ongoing civil suit brought by Crestline's shareholders and a separate regulatory inquiry. He had relocated, according to a brief item in the Charlotte Observer's business section, to take a position at a smaller firm in Greenville, South Carolina. The item did not editorialize. It did not need to. Vanessa's administrative leave had concluded with a settlement agreement negotiated through Claudette's office and Crestline's HR counsel. She retained her professional credentials. She did not retain the vice presidency, which had never officially existed. She had taken a marketing director position at a regional healthcare company in Huntersville, a step down from what she had been reaching for, but a solid position for a woman who was, by all accounts, genuinely skilled at her work when she was not operating in the shadow of someone else's agenda. The divorce had been finalized quietly, through independent attorneys, without any claim on the corporate assets. Claudette had been thorough and the documents had been complete. Marcus had not made the process harder than it needed to be. He had also not made it easier than it was. On the new porch, in the early morning of a Thursday in late February, Marcus sat with his thermos and watched the light come up over the roofline of the house across the alley. A house with a foundation crack that the owners had been meaning to address for 2 years. He had mentioned it to them once. They had thanked him. He had not mentioned it again. There was a woman who sometimes joined him for coffee on Saturday mornings, a landscape architect named Gloria, who had an office 2 streets over, and who had once spent 20 minutes asking him about the load distribution requirements for a rooftop garden she was designing. He had answered all her questions. She had come back the following week with a revised drawing and asked if he thought she had it right. He thought she probably had it more right than she knew. The things worth building, his mother used to say, are the ones that hold up when you walk away from them. Marcus poured the last of the coffee from his thermos into his cup. The sky was the particular blue-gray of 5:40 in the morning. A cardinal landed on the cedar railing of the new porch, examined him briefly, and flew away. He sat with the quiet for a while longer. Then he went inside to begin the day. I hope you enjoyed that one. Be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. I've picked out 2 more for you that I think you'll really like.